Hey everybody! Welcome to the Gay Street Studios on this rainy afternoon. We're going to be finishing up Gatsby today, so thanks for being here as usual. You remember we were looking last time at Gatsby as myth, and we came to that idea. We should take a quick look at it again. On page 104 in this text. It's the paragraph beginning. I suppose he had the name ready for a long time, and the paragraph says, the truth was that Jay Gatsby of West Egg, Long Island, sprang from his platonic conception of himself. He was a son of God, a phrase which, if it means anything, means just that. And he must be about his father's business, capital H, capital F. Of course, referring to himself as you know, that the generative principle, the sort of eternal generative principle that creates himself. So Fitzgerald has him standing in for that kind of transcendent autonomous and autotelic principle, the principle of generation, the principle of self-creation. Sprang from his platonic conception of himself. He was a son of God, a phrase which, if it means anything, means just that. And he must be about his father's business. And here's the business: the service of a vast, vulgar, and meretricious beauty, which has a very American ring to it, the superficiality, the hypocrisy, the vulgarity. We've seen that at work recently, haven't we? We've seen the apotheosis, we hope anyway, the apotheosis of that at work around us. So he invented, the boy, Jimmy Gatz, invented just the sort of Jay Gatsby that a 17-year-old boy would be likely to invent. And to this conception, he remained faithful. Like that word faithful from theological discourse. It's a matter of faith. He doesn't say loyal, right? He says faithful. So the idea of a self-generating creation, a self-generating self-creation that is an idea. That's why Fitzgerald wants that word platonic in there. It is ideal. It is idealist. It is romantic in that sense, in the sense that it's linked to something ineffable, indefinable, eternal, and powerfully positive, immitigable. Okay, well, turn a few pages along to page 116, and we come to a remarkable moment in the work, and this is Gatsby talking to Nick about his previous conversation with Daisy, essentially about leaving Tom and coming back to him. Do you see the paragraph beginning? He wanted, this is page 116 in this text. He wanted nothing less of Daisy. Everybody have that? He wanted nothing less of Daisy than that she should go to Tom and say, "I never loved you." After she had obliterated 3 years with that sentence, see, you have to read it slow, you feel the wryness, W-R-Y, the wryness of Fitzgerald's narrative, of Fitzgerald's Nick, right? His wit, his wryness. You get a sense for the preposterous quality of what Gatsby's asking here, you see? But to Gatsby, it's completely not preposterous. Why? Because, again, he's wrapped in this romantic, narcissistic, ideal, egocentric, uh, sense of his own limitless possibilities, and sense that the landscape itself seems to work for him. You know, the landscape itself is part of this self-creation, self-promotion, this self-succeeding. Um, okay. Um, I hear my neighbors, the working guys are out in my neighbor's backyard sawing tiles for their new bathroom. So that's always nice, even though it's actually drizzling. So I hope they're staying dry. Okay. After she had obliterated 3 years with that sentence, they could decide upon the more practical measures to be taken. One of those more practical measures, was that after she was free, they were to go back to Louisville and be married from her house. Louisville, which was Montgomery for Fitzgerald, uh, and be married from her house, just as if it were 5 years ago, 1917. So Gatsby says, and she doesn't understand, he said despairingly. She used to be able to understand. We'd sit for hours, dash. What should follow that dash? This is one of the hallmarks of the romantic writer, and Fitzgerald does this constantly. He doesn't quite finish the sentence. He doesn't quite finish the thought. He leaves the abstraction in place, right? He leaves the ideal in place. He doesn't want to articulate, because to articulate would be to confine linguistically, just like to articulate for his main character here is to confine existentially or experientially. You see? We'd sit for hours, and what? You know, she used to be able to understand. We'd sit for hours, and what? You know, the way I finished that sentence is, and she would listen to me talk about how I imagined my own future and understand what her role was in my imagination of my future, and which coincidentally is our future together. You see? And there's something very beautiful about that moment. And I think it does happen between lovers, you know, when lovers share each other's dreams, which of course involve intimately each's the conception of each for the other. Do you see? And that's part of what love is. It's part of what love is that we see ourselves reflected in this particular other. Do you see what I mean? It's an idea of ourselves is part of our relationship with the beloved. We imagine, when we fall in love, we imagine the self that's falling in love with this particular other. You see, and this is what Fitzgerald's exploring in part, right? The beauty of that and the risk of that, the wonder of that, yet the danger of that. Yeah? He broke off and began to walk up and down a desolate path of fruit rinds and discarded favors and crushed flowers. Hey, I wouldn't ask too much of her, I ventured, Nick says. You know, you can't repeat the past. Can't repeat the past? Why, of course you can. It's so good. So there's Gatsby in a nutshell, isn't it? You know, it's as if he's saying, you know, just looking at it again, it's as if he's saying, you know, why, of course you can repeat the past. It's as if he's saying, what, you know, I won't be bound by the trivialities of time and place, you know, with a capital T and a capital P. You know, my desire, what, you know, my desire supersedes time and place. The power and the urgency of my impulse to create myself, of my dream of what I can be and of what you can be with me, my beloved. You see, my dream, our dreams are bigger than what confines everybody else's. Do you see? Time, place, mortality itself. right? So you're right at the heart of a kind of symbolic, uh, an embodiment of symbolic properties that we recognize very powerfully, or that we recognize as very powerfully American. You see? Now, at the same time, they're very powerfully human, but you can see the humanity in the American, and the American in the humanity. I don't mean to imply this doesn't exist for other cultures. Of course it does. Of course it does, right? But and versions of it, probably not the same. You know, I don't know enough about other cultures, or enough about the literatures of other cultures. All right. I'd be very interested if those of you, any of you interested in writing on works that derive from other nationalities, other cultures that similarly embody or speak to or address in some way critically or in praise of the national identities, so to speak, the national or cultural identities from which those works emerge, and the relationship between, you know, this work and those, and or this work and America, and that work and whatever nation it derives from. Kind of, you know, we think of the great American novel. I'd be really interested in somebody writing on another great blank novel from whatever culture, and then working with the comparison. Be a cool paper. Um, okay. Uh, he looked around him wildly, as if the past were lurking here in the shadow of his house, just out of reach of his hand. Just out of reach of his hand. You remember the Grecian urn, right? Just out of reach of his hand, like the light at the end of the dock. Just out of the reach of his hand, like Daisy herself. Just out of the reach of his hand, like you know, the self-created self that he hasn't quite finished, that he needs Daisy, so to speak, to complete. Um, uh, 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 and think of the, you know, what I was saying about Lacan's objet a, the objet petit a, you know, that which is in us more than ourselves, which is us more than ourselves, that we can't quite reach, a plenitude that we can't quite acquire. So we're defined by our wanting. And then I think also the Keatsian, the very romanticist notion of the sublime, that is that component of our perceptual reality that defies interpretation. You know, a wonder so profound, an instance of wonder so profound that it defies comprehension, right? That's the sublime. Right, that's pretty good. Damn, I wish I'd written that down. That's good. But that, you know, and that's what, you know, you ask our great one person who reads a lot of romantic literature, Dr. Carroll, Alicia Carroll, about that. She's not a romanticist, you know, by trade, but is very well versed in that tradition. And the idea of the sublime, that which is beyond our grasp, and so I was going to say sublimely so, um, uh, and overwhelmingly so beyond our grasp. And for the Romantics found this in moments of nature, right? Moments of nature like Mont Blanc, or the Lake District, or you know, an abandoned abbey, um, and so on. In the abandoned abbey in the countryside. I'm thinking of specific poems. Okay, continuing. I'm going to fix everything just the way it was before, he said, nodding determinedly. She'll see. He talked a lot about the past. And I gathered that he, look at this, y'all, wanted to recover something. You know, that word recover is interesting because it implies lost. Out of neglect, out of bad luck, out of a combination, out of the necessity of taking care of other pragmatic concerns first, thinking of Fitzgerald's own life and his own early relationship with Zelda. Whatever combination, something had been lost. Wow, and it's such a human condition, isn't it? That which has been lost in our attempt to, some of you may have been in this position. it's none of my business to ask. And put your hands down if you have. I don't want to know. Put your virtual hands down. But some of you may have been in this position of having, through neglect, bad decisions, bad luck, the necessity of taking care of other things first, timing, you've lost something that was dear to you. And you've thought to yourself, is it gone? Or can I find it again? And it's that romantic imagination in you that says, I can find it. It's still there. I can find it again, like Odysseus can find Penelope again, like Odysseus can find Telemachus again on the journey home. Like Ithaca still waits for us, right? I'm riffing on the Odyssey, but that's the idea. Those are mythic characters as well. Something similar to the Odyssey about this work as well. I think we've touched on it a few times. He wanted to recover something, some idea of himself, perhaps, that had gone into loving Daisy. His life had been confused and disordered since then. Isn't that interesting? Some idea of himself, perhaps, that had gone. I like how Fitzgerald throws in that perhaps, because that's exactly what it is. Some idea of himself that had gone into loving, and this is what we've been talking about, that had gone into loving Daisy. In other words, when we love, there's something in there's something, we see ourselves in that particular other, and it's a version of ourselves that we wish for. We desire that self, the one that we see reflected in that other. That's part of what we love when we love the other, isn't it? Isn't it? So love itself, there's a kind of romantic egotism, Fitzgerald's early title, right? Romantic egotism. There's a kind of romantic egotism in love, isn't there? There's a kind of, yes, it's a form of generosity, a form of embracing the other, but in that other that we embrace is the self that we want to see of ourselves in ourselves. And that's what Fitzgerald's examining. Some idea of himself that had gone into loving Daisy. His life had been loving Daisy. His life had been confused and disordered since then. But if he could once return to a certain starting place and go over it all slowly, he could find out what that thing was. And sure enough, next paragraph, Fitzgerald through Nick takes us back to that starting place. Excuse me. It's 1917, 5 years earlier. ... One autumn night, 5 years before. Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit. I'm just going to skip an inch. Okay. I like that. You see the sentence, the quiet lights in the houses, like a few lines down, inch down. The quiet lights in the houses were humming out into the darkness. Look at this, y'all. There was a stir and bustle among the stars. So there's Gatsby and Daisy walking, and they see the lights humming from the houses, and they look up, and there was a stir and bustle among the stars. What is it? What's a bustle among the stars? What the hell is that? Is that something you see? A bustle among the stars? Is it something you hear? What the hell? What is a stir among the stars? Is the Milky Way suddenly moving? What is that? What is that? You see? And that's Fitzgerald's romanticism. And he wants us in the language, in the diction, in the lexicon, and its combinations and permutations. He wants to conjure wonder in us linguistically, You see? Because what he's just described can't happen. There is no damn bustle in the stars, you know? There is no stirring in the stars. Van Gogh didn't create the stars above Montgomery. But Fitzgerald is saying, yes, Van Gogh did create the stars above Montgomery. And when you're in love and when you see the world in all of its wonder, that's what the stars look like. And when you feel the wonder of love and you experience the possibility that our earth can offer to us in one another and in our relationships with us, you look into a pond and what you see is Monet's water lilies. And it's a certain kind of romantic approach to the writing of prose, you see? And I think this is, I don't think Pound and Eliot could do this. I don't think Hemingway could do this. They could not do this. I don't think Fitzgerald could do what they do either. You know, I don't think we have to choose, but I'm just trying to, as students of literature, it's important for us, I think, to be able to distinguish what one style, what one style can do and can't, right? And I think you see different instances of those different stylistic choices, stylistic capabilities, and semantic and semiotic implications, the differing semantic and semiotic implications of those different stylistic choices. I'd be very interested in reading on that, even to the point of just looking at specific passages, say from Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and examining choices and implications. That's a cool paper idea, for those of you who are of a more linguistic turn. Interested in languages. I know a couple of you are. Okay. The quiet lights in the houses were humming out into the darkness, and there was a stir and bustle among the stars. Out of the corner of his eye, Gatsby saw that the blocks of the sidewalk really formed a ladder. I love that, really formed a ladder. The landscape is being transformed. And what's it being transformed by? The magic of this romantic moment and the forceful wonder that resides in this human being who imagines himself beyond limitation and who imagines the other with him as part of that immense scope of being, that immense ontological scope, that vast ontological occupation. That's what transforms the landscape into Monet's landscape and Van Gogh's landscape and Fitzgerald's landscape. You feel something, if you love books, you love this moment. Okay. Really formed a ladder and mounted to a secret place above the trees. He could climb it. There's a possibility, but look at the condition. If he climbed alone. Okay, now why? Why if he climbed? Why do you have to be alone to climb that ladder? Because that landscape is entirely a function of your own imagination, your own vision. And the presence of the other can do nothing but mitigate and limit. You have to be untethered, you see? You have to be Odysseus. You have to be Aeneas. You have to be untethered from the real in order to be able to imagine with such radical freedom. And, I'm saying radical freedom. It's also highly patriarchal, isn't it? So it's also, such radical narcissism, such radical arrogance, right? Such radical unreality. Yeah. If he climbed alone. And once there, he could suck on the pap of life and gulp down the incomparable milk of wonder. The pap of life. His heart beat faster and faster as Daisy's white face came up to his own. He knew that, okay, here we go. Here's the crucial moment. When he kissed this girl, this reality, this is the objet a, no longer merely formal. Remember we talked about this? No longer merely formal, no longer an empty set, right? Asserting her own reality. He knew that when he kissed this girl and forever married, his unutterable visions, why unutterable? Because to utter them would be to limit them, right? So what we were talking about earlier. To articulate the dream would be to compromise the dream. It's a romantic notion, right? To wed his unutterable visions, by definition unutterable, to her perishable breath, mortal. Speaking of the Odyssey, it's Odysseus and Penelope. When he's with Calypso, the nymph, who offers him, impossible eternal sexual bliss in a sexually beautiful body, in her sexually beautiful body unchanging eternally, and his sexually beautiful body unchanging eternally, and she offers them together a life of eternal, impossible sexual bliss forever. He says, no, I want my Penelope. I choose mortality. I choose the flaw. I choose the scar. I choose to row among fellows. I'm not a god. I choose my wife. He knew that when he kissed this girl and forever wed his unutterable visions to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. You see, because the mind of God, remember his father's business and his platonic creation of himself from a minute ago, page 104, that's compromised by the perishable, by the mortal. That infinite dream, that adolescent Jimmy Gatz infinite dream, is compromised by the reality of the other. And when you choose the reality of the other, you must accommodate it. And it changes the deathless possibility. So he waited, listening for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. Bing! The tuning fork that had been struck up. What tuning fork? Stars don't have tuning forks. There was no sound on the sidewalks, when he's walking down and bringing the face up, as if it's being, as if Nelson Riddle is composing the score to the movie of yourself. I mean, that's not, stars don't do that, right? It's exactly like the bustle and the stir. What? There's no bustle, there's no store, there's no turning tune fork, but there is, you see. So this is what Fitzgerald is saying. Our subjectivity, and in moments of romantic wonder, when we recognize our own beauty and the beauty of the other and the beauty of the landscape, this is how we see. And this is why we respond to it so beautifully when we see it reflected in literature, and when we hear it in our music that gives it to us all the time, right? Our jazz, our music without words, and music with our words. Then he kissed her. At his lips' touch, she blossomed for him like a flower, and look at Fitzgerald's language, the incarnation was complete. So here, the mind of God, that Platonic source of conception, here, that immaculate conception. I said wrong word, immaculate, because the conception only can occur via the other. Do you see? So the abstraction of the dream takes on reality. And yes, it is compromised by that reality in its scope. You see what I'm saying? But it's also made real by that reality. It is potentiated by the reality of the other. Our dream of the self is potentiated by the reality of our beloved other. I wish I would have written that down. Yeah, that's really good. Okay, so it's a moment of, that's the conception, all right? Okay, let's see how we're doing on time here. Good. And turn to page 153. And this is later. Listen, this is later after the tragic events. And there's Nick sees Gatsby. They're together waiting, or essentially they're watching outside of Daisy and Tom's house, looking through the windows late at night. So it's on page 152. You see the paragraph beginning, Daisy and Tom were sitting opposite each other. Daisy and Tom were sitting opposite each other at the kitchen table with a plate of cold fried chicken between them and 2 bottles of ale. He was talking intently across the table at her, and, pardon me, in his earnestness, his hand had fallen upon and covered her own. So there's Gatsby and Nick watching this. Once in a while, she looked up at him and nodded in agreement. Pardon me. They weren't happy, and neither of them had touched the chicken or the ale, and yet they weren't unhappy either. There was an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture. In other words, this is not an ideal moment. This is ideal in a Platonic sense. This is not a transcendent moment. It's a real moment. It's a marriage moment. It's a domestic moment when 2 people who have encountered each other's reality encounter it in each other again. After crisis, often it's crisis that leads to these moments. There was an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture, and anybody would have said that they were conspiring together. They were conspiring together about how to stay together and how to move past this Gatsby who's inserted himself into their life together. As I tiptoed from the porch, I heard my taxi feeling its way along the dark road toward the house. Gatsby was waiting where I had left him in the drive. Is it all quiet up there? He asked anxiously. Yes, it's quiet. I'm sorry, I mischaracterized it. What I've just been describing, only Nick has seen. Jay has not seen. Right. Gatsby was waiting where I had left him in the drive. Is it all quiet up there? Yes, it's all quiet. You better come home and get some sleep. He shook his head. I want to wait here till Daisy goes to bed. Good night, old sport. He put his hands in his coat pockets and turned back eagerly to his scrutiny of the house, as though my presence marred the sacredness of the vigil. Note the theological language again, the sacredness of the vigil. Why is it sacred? Why does Fitzgerald characterize it as a vigil? Sacred because in the this holy HOLY, this holy process of self-creation, of a God who dreams himself into being, a God who dreams his life and puts it together piece by piece. This is the last component in the ideal architecture of that self-composed, self-empowered dreaming. A very American conceit. And it's a holy moment. He's the overseer. Gatsby thinks of himself as the overseer of this holy moment, the protector of this last component, which is just about to slip into place. So I walked away and left him standing there in the moonlight, watching over nothing. Nothing, because Gatsby has no idea that he has no more place in the life of Daisy, and Daisy can't slip into place in his life, and the objet that Daisy has become remains ineffable and remains ungraspable, defies his attempt to enlist her in this last moment of his dreaming, in which his urge for self-creation comes to its apogee, its final moments of consummation, its final plenitude. Which of course can never be reached, as it can never be reached in any of us. We can experience it in moments, can't we? We feel it in moments, but ultimately it's that kernel of dissatisfaction, that kernel that we can't quite fill in us, that keeps us desiring. Okay, well, projecting to the end, you know what happens. And you have to ask yourself, why does Gatsby have to die? Why does Gatsby have to die if you're Fitzgerald? And you remember we started off with those 3 myths around which the structure of the work is erected. The myth of the pioneer myth, the myth of the American dream, and the former Catholic F. Scott Fitzgerald, the story of the man Jesus. So why does Gatsby have to die? He's a victim of the love he has for the person he's trying to save. He's killed by the passion and purity of this love. In essence, he dies for Daisy's sin. And we really feel that intimate association with the story of the man Jesus. And then the story of the man Jesus, and then the myth of the Gospels. Gatsby's death reflects our own vulnerability to the love we bear for the other that our desire itself has created. So finally, the novel constitutes a wistful, ambivalent myth. So I'm gonna nail the myth, but also nail the ambivalence. The novel is a testament to, first, the power of love. The power of love. Yet, here's the ambivalence, a warning that this power is significantly a function of vanity a projection of ego, and is illusion. The power of love, yet a warning that this power is significantly a function of vanity, a projection of ego, and illusion. Secondly, it's a testament to the possibility of self-creation. Yet, it's the ambiguity. It's a warning that the world will not allow this declaration of independence to go unchallenged. And third, it's a testament to the splendor of the dream. Now, let me take a moment to define as precisely as I can what is meant by the dream. And it has three components. First of all, the dream, the ability to see beyond the real to the not yet real. The ability to imagine the future beyond limitation, a future that does not yet exist. Second component, the ability to see the world as possibility rather than compromise and foreclosure. Third component, the ability to liberate the future from the past. Okay, so let me just go through those again. The splendor of the dream, defining the dream, the ability to see beyond the real to the not yet real, the ability to see the world as possibility rather than compromise and foreclosure, the ability to liberate the future from the past. And that I'm going to get back to this, but that great moment, famous moment when Nick has just had breakfast with Gatsby, I believe. Turn to page 161, toward the end of the book. Yeah, page 161. This is, do you see the paragraph beginning? We should, it's at the very bottom of 161 if you have this text. We shook hands and I started away. Okay, so they're saying goodbye outside after the breakfast. We shook hands and I started away. Just before I reached the hedge, I remembered something and turned around. "They're a rotten crowd," I shouted across the lawn. "You're worth the whole damn bunch put together." I've always been glad that I said that. It was the only compliment I ever gave him because I disapproved of him from beginning to end. I disapproved of him from beginning to end. In other words, Nick Fitzgerald, from the beginning, saw in Gatsby, also Fitzgerald, right? Both symbolic projections of aspects of authorial consciousness. Do you see? Both projections of authorial self-critique, both projections of the authorial romantic, right? So you see Nick and Jay and Daisy as symbolic components of the expressive authorial self, just as we see them as symbolic components, all three of them, of our own psychologies, of our own spiritualities, of our own sense of love and sexuality, of our own sense of the social, of our own sense of our own subjectivity, of our own sense of our own identity. It's just like Penelope lives in us, whether you're a young man or a young woman, Penelope is in you. Telemachus lives in us, whether you're a young man or a young woman, Telemachus lives in you. Odysseus is in you, whether you're a young man or a young woman, Odysseus is in you. You are Odysseus, young man, young woman. You are Telemachus, young man, young woman. You are Penelope, young man, young woman. Young men, there will be times when you feel the Penelope in yourself very strongly. It's hard to imagine when you're young, but you'll feel that. Young women, you'll feel the Odysseus in yourself very strongly. You can feel Telemachus in yourself now. stepping across that liminal border from youth, childhood to youth to adulthood. You're there right now, stepping out into that world of vulnerability. But you know, that world of kleos, achievement, glory, but a world that can wound you, that can scar you, and you'll be defined by those scars. So you'll be Odysseus as well. You know how I can say that successfully about all of us, that those three Odyssean characters are in us, because you're here now. You're on the journey. You're Telemachus already, stepping out onto the wine dark sea of human experience to find yourself and to lose yourself and to find yourself again in a new way. It's the same with these characters, right? You're worth the whole damn bunch put together. I disapproved of him from beginning to end. First, he nodded politely. Then his face broke into that radiant and understanding smile, as if we'd been in ecstatic cahoots on that fact all the time, the whole time. His gorgeous pink rag of a suit made a bright spot of color against the white steps. And I thought of the night when I first came to his ancestral home, the Rye Fitzgerald. Nothing ancestral about it. His ancestral home. That's part of what he disapproved of, you know, the fakeness, the superficiality, the hypocrisy, frankly. The lawn and drive had been crowded with the faces of those who guessed at his corruption. And he had stood on those steps, concealing his incorruptible dream. So the corruption is obvious. People see it. People see its consequences. People see its rewards. God help us. But it's the dream that remains incorruptible, encased in the problematic, encased in the unacceptable. And how do we unearth it? How do we move it from that, from its corrupt sheathing, and find it and act on it without corruption? Can we do that? Can we, as Americans, God help us, do that anymore? Or is the corruptible layering around that dream too thick, too disturbing, too destructive? Can we find it again? Concealing his incorruptible dream as he waved them goodbye, I thanked him for his hospitality. We were always thanking him for that, I and the others. Goodbye, I called. I enjoyed breakfast, Gatsby. But you know, you're worth the whole damn bunch put together. Why is it that Fitzgerald can say that? I mean, he can say that because Gatsby embodies the splendor of that incorruptible dream that all of us can find in ourselves, that all of us, I hope everybody in this classroom has felt it in themselves. Do you see? It's still in him. And Nick does not romanticize the corruptible nature, you know, the corrupt nature that has enabled that dream, right? Doesn't romanticize that. But he does identify the beautiful sense of wonder and possibility that continues to reside in Gatsby right up to the end. Ironically, because he's watching out over nothing. It's what makes him a hero, do you see? And what makes his story a tragedy. Remember that earlier quote? Show me a hero, I'll write you a tragedy. Here it is. It's in Odysseus. It's in Virgil. It's in Claudia McTeer in The Bluest Eye. Okay, so he embodies the splendor of the dream, yet, here's that ambiguity. The novel's a warning that the dream must accommodate actuality in order to survive, and the past is always already the future, and the future can never elude the past. Let me just give you that to you again. So the novel's a warning, first of all, that the dream must always accommodate actuality in order to survive. Secondly, it's a warning that the past is always already the future. And third, it's a warning that the future can never successfully elude the past. So where does that leave us? Where's the present in this formula? Well, the present, a condensation of the past and the future. The present, a condensation of regret and aspiration. The present, an incarnation of the lost as well as the hoped for. The present, an incarnation of the lost and the hoped for. Gatsby embodying these. Okay, I just want to just see where we are here. Okay. Go to the very last page of the novel. It's on page, page 189. It's not the last paragraph, but you see the paragraph beginning most of the big shore places. Most of the big shore places were closed now, and there were hardly any lights except the shadowy moving glow of a ferry boat across the sound. And as the moon rose higher, the inessential houses began to melt away, until gradually I became aware of the old island here, Long Island, the old island, think of Manhattan as well, the old island here that flowered once for Dutch sailors' eyes, a fresh green breast of the New World. Its vanished trees, the trees that had made way for Gatsby's house, that had made way for the American world, the American civilization, the American culture that we still inhabit, made way for Gatsby's house, had once pandered in whispers to the last and greatest of all human dreams. For a transitory, enchanted moment, man, humankind, must have held his breath in the presence of this continent, compelled into an aesthetic contemplation he neither understood nor desired, face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. That is something incarnate, something large enough to include our dreams, a geography of possibility. But of course, as we know, like Gatsby, that impulse, that dream that allowed those early Americans, if you will, to imagine that culture before them, carried with it corruption, carried with it the negatives that were so profound and that are so profound, that were so profound and became even more profound over time, profound enough to utterly vitiate the beauty of that dream. And so we see our own American ambiguity, our moral ambiguity in Gatsby. And I think Fitzgerald very, very sort of consciously understands this, that the problematic nature of our culture, the morally corrupt bases, but the incorruptible dream that, God help us, is inseparable from its morally corrupt, from its shameful facies, its shameful realities. And there we are as Americans, strung in the tension between those two, reciprocally defining elements in our American Constitution, in our Constitution as Americans. Lester Young, tenor saxophone player. Lester Young was among the first to demonstrate the power of silence. He had a very quote unquote spacey sound, the bassist Gene Ramey said. He would play a phrase and maybe lay out 3 beats before he'd come in with another. Young showed that understatement was compatible with swinging, that cool and hot could coexist, and that a lope instead of a gallop might bring you first to the finish line. Ralph Ellison heard him play in an Oklahoma City shoeshine parlor. Ralph Ellison, the great African-American writer, the author of some of the most important American literature, not just African-American literature, but American literature. The Invisible Man, chief among them, Ralph Ellison. Quote, he was jamming in a shine chair, his head thrown back, his horn even then out thrust, his feet working on the footrests as he played with and against Ben Webster and other members of the Blue Devils. With his heavy white sweater, blue stocking cap, and up and out thrust silver saxophone, he left absolutely no reed player and few young players of any instrument unstirred by the wild, excitingly original flights of his imagination. Lester Young, with his battered horn, upset the entire Negro section of town. And this is Lester Young. Lester leaps in. Count Basie's Kansas City 7. There's Lester in the pork pie, his famous pork pie hat.